Hi, it's Alex again from the Remote Work Life Podcast. I hope you're well, wherever you may be in the world. I have yet another special guest today with me. I have Rowena Hennigan. And Rowena is a remote work skills expert. And she's got unique experience of designing and delivering university accredited courses in that subject. She's passionate about well-being in remote work, which is what we all need, especially in organisations. It's obviously vital, and she views that as vital in effective operations, and I couldn't agree more. She is the employee programs remote expert for two large insurance companies. Now, Rowena works 100% remote from Spain. Oh, I'd love to be there right now. And she's founded two fully remote companies herself. She's founded RoRemote and Rise, which is R-I-S-E in capital letters. So Rise, which is all about emotional intelligence. And she's, of course, a seasoned digital nomad. Rowena, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and you're very welcome.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks for the fabulous introduction. It's lovely to join you today.
No, it's wonderful. It's that first conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, because I met Rowena, we met via LinkedIn, I believe it was. I met via referral. Somebody recommended you to the show, and I thought, let me have a look. So I looked, and I'd heard of you before, and you're somebody who is well known in the world of remote work, and very much a pioneer, I would have said, within the world of remote work. So what I really want to know is, how did you come to be the remote work expert that you are today?
I guess it started back in 2007. I was working with a telecommunications company in Ireland, in the west of Ireland, who are now known as Avaya, but back then, Alex, they were called Nortel. And I was part of a global team, and we were enabled to work remotely. It was the early days of things like Microsoft Communicator and early communication tools. And I worked a lot between the UK and Ireland. And I started working, as I said, on a virtual team then, and it really opened my mind to it. And around that time as well, I did some traveling, and I began to realize that I could work virtually. And it wasn't complete remote work as we know it now, because it was in its early stages. But that was my first taster. And then fast forward on to around 2012, I was pregnant with my daughter and living in Dublin. And yeah, I started to work a little bit from home on a couple of the contracts I had at the time. And that, you have children, but when you have kids or when you're moving into family life, remote work is really flexible. It really supports you. And it was something that I thought, this is great. I'm leaning on this skill, this way of life again. I'm really interested in it. It's part of my passion. And as I was working through those in a kind of hybrid model, as we call it now, with two contracts, I began to notice some of the skills you need to work remotely. My background is in marketing, communications, and psychology, and I was really interested in how we communicated virtually, how we made our intentions clear, how we were self-leaders, self-managers as individual remote workers. And then a big life change happened for me, and it's a big part of my story. My daughter, around the age of 1, developed quite bad asthma, chronic asthma, in fact. So those first couple of years of her early life were very stressful, to the point where myself and my husband moved to Spain because we were seeking out drier climate for her. And that is where I suddenly really, it was like the life lesson to go. Remote work has enabled me, first of all, enabled me to keep my career going with a very sick child. And I can flash back to 2014 and 15, surviving on such low levels of sleep for nearly 3 years in total, but managing to work a little bit flexibly in the two contracts I had then, and then being able to change my whole life and move to Spain with my family and enable my daughter's health because of taking advantage of, appreciating the remote work way of life. And in my introduction, you said, I'm a digital nomad. Now I have a confession. I'm a wannabe digital nomad. It's a bit difficult with a young child, but I still love to travel. I go to Bali, I work from there because I have family there. I've been to France because I have family there and work from there. When I go back to Ireland, it's the same. So it's a way of life for me, and I am really, really appreciative and grateful to remote work as a way of life and a way of thinking and a way of working, because it really kept me sane when I needed it and kept me working, Alex. And that's why I'm so passionate about it.
And you've said, actually, I've counted about 2 or 3 times, which you said it's a way of life, and it's I couldn't agree more. And it's a way of life that, and from the sounds of what you've just said, it's enabled you. It's an enabler. It enables you to build the life that you want and that you need. It's helped you to move out to Spain, to help your daughter, to be able to apply your expertise wherever you may be in the world at the same level that you would do, or probably even better than you would do if you were in an office. And you've built a great career, and now you're advising people on remote work. And
exactly.
you mentioned the traveling. And in fact, maybe what we should say at the top of the show as well is that a bit of a disclaimer, in the sense that we're certainly not in a kind of a normal situation as things stand at the moment. This by no means, and I keep saying this because lots of people are still conflating the two, but this is us being forced to work from home. This is not remote work. So there are constraints, as Rowena was saying, about her ability to travel and all those other sorts of things. But no, it sounds like have been able to build a great life for yourself. You've got your clients now as well across the world. Where are your clients distributed?
So I have clients in Europe. I have some international work as well with the States. I choose. I'm a solopreneur, and I have the other company you mentioned, Rise Emotional Intelligence, which is looking at services for corporates in emotional intelligence, specifically for remote teams, virtual teams. And that's with a co-founder, Sandra Thompson, out of the UK, who we've never met. Okay, we founded the company in July and we've never met. RoRemote, my own consultancy service and company, it's mostly European though, Alex, because I choose it that way because of time zone. So I want to make that clear as well. I do have some further off work, but that's also the joy. Time zones can be a challenge, and as well as being an advocate for remote work, it's my own flavour of remote work. I say to myself that I don't want to be on calls generally at 11 o'clock at night. And because of the nature of my work, consulting and training, I would need to do that if I was working a lot with the States. So for now, I'm choosing that European zone, which is more time zone friendly with the family. But that's all part of the values that go with this way of life, to what you said. And taking that way of life and that purpose that it can bring to you, because your priorities are often different. Some of my priorities when my daughter was sick were forced on me. I didn't have the choice. I had to work in the couple of hours after I'd had, in between naps or whatever. Whereas now I look at life differently, and I look at those values and that purpose from that experience. And what's interesting, and thanks for reminding, because we can never forget, is we are living through such an exceptional, extraordinary time. What many people are doing, and even, I did it for 5 months solid, is not true remote work. If you're confined in your home, emergency home working, it's not the same. And you are restricted, you have stress, you have distractions, you have competing responsibilities. And what's interesting for me is, as hard as this last year has been for everyone in different ways, it actually reminded me of those values. It actually brought back to me the importance of choosing flexible work to prioritize your work-life balance and well-being as an individual. And that's why I'm so passionate as well about individual remote workers being aware of that for themselves and knowing that they can choose that.
And that's another word you've used quite often in this, and it's something that's applied to not just you, but many others in your situation. Choice, choosing, having the ability to choose, but at the same time, it doesn't detract from the work and all that kind of thing. Having choice is so important, and you've been able to build that in. But of course, it's been by no means easy going, I'm sure. And this kind of way of work, as is, you know, when you're first starting out, if you don't have, even if you're quite experienced anyway, it can have its demands, can't it? What sort of challenges do you face when you were sort of starting out? And I mean, yeah, how did you overcome those challenges?
There is definitely a learning curve, and there can be a learning curve, particularly as a sort of in that freelance solopreneur model where you're dealing with different companies all the time. So I'll give you an example. At one point in June, I was using 14 different video conferencing tools for large presentations.
Wow.
Okay, of different ilks. Some of them, and I won't name names because I don't want to get in trouble. I was like, is that really what that does? When I would get the invite to the link. And having to, I mean, and obviously I'm 20 odd years in my career. So like us joking at the start, Alex, when some piece of technology doesn't work, it's all about experience.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a steep learning curve when I started out remote and established my company, RoRemote, in 2017, learning the tools, understanding more about asynchronous communications, the levels of remote work, applying them to myself, then looking around back then and trying to learn more about GitHub, GitLab. I mean, Andy Treba that you had on from Crossover would be someone that I have followed and admired, and I listened to the podcast, great podcast episode with him, and so much to learn about how he's taken, for example, and other companies and other leaders in the space about how they were doing things in remote. So I had that challenge of learning. And then this year, that's been accelerated completely. So that challenge of keeping up to date and understanding what is out there in terms of remote work and the different maturity stages and models, but then applying it to your own personal or company or team situation. Obviously, that's something that's ongoing and you're always learning. And it's almost like you have to almost remind yourself that it's constantly evolving. But the good news for listeners is, and I'm sure you would agree, that the wealth and quality of information now is astounding in these recent months. And people can join in and learn so much quicker than someone, say, who was, you know, trying to get into remote work 5 or 10 years ago. There's a lot more easy, accessible information in the community to build up the YouTube videos, those how-to documents, all of that. So that was one of the challenges. The other challenge as well, and it's a known challenge within the whole area of remote work, is that potential to overwork, which could lead into burnout. So I mostly I'm in my co-working space today. I do have my husband who's in an office near me, but I'm on my own in a physical, in-person sense most days. So I have to be my own boss in terms of hours, in terms of routine. And that's something that can also be a challenge. And it's one of the areas I'm really interested in as a remote worker, because you can feel that you are challenged or may have some difficulties in how you see that working day and those working hours.
You know, as you were talking there, I'm nodding away because I'm thinking to myself, that's something I experienced as well. That happened to me too. It's amazing when you start to talk to other people, especially other people like you with your expertise and the fact you've worked remotely, and when I was actually starting out, my learning went down. It just went down the pan back in 2009 because, like you're saying, you have to be more deliberate about searching out the information, understanding what's current, and you know, there's lots of information, as you said, and there's sometimes quite a lot to actually trawl through on the internet. But yeah, I can really understand that, and the overwork as well. That's something probably I still do, and I think when we last spoke, I admitted to that, didn't I? When I was speaking to you.
But we're all human, and I mean, I do it some days as well. Of course, we're all human, but it's having open conversations like this because you maybe don't have that. I mean, I've worked in real teams, and I'm sure you did as well before 2000, in real office spaces where someone might turn around and go, "Oh, you haven't had your lunch. Alex, come on, let's go for lunch."
Yeah.
Sitting near you. We don't have that. And so how do we put in a framework or a support infrastructure around us where we build our intention or our deliberate intention to make sure we take our breaks, to make sure that we we keep that balance. As I said, it won't be perfect every day, so don't beat yourself up about it, but in the main. And then what can we do? Like what you and I've been doing, just have chats, compare notes, what works for you, share openly, and then reach out into the virtual world, because that's what I'm sure you'll know from the podcast as well. The community is so supportive, and you can reach out to people, and if there is something that's bugging you about your hours, about your maybe stress levels, whatever it may be, about feeling a little bit socially isolated, there's a lot of support out in the remote work world in relation to that. And actually in the show notes there's a fabulous site called Meet Cafecito. I'm using my Spanish, which is simply a site where you can meet other virtual workers for a coffee, for example. And it's available all the time, and you can match up on different interests. There's other things like that people can lean into when they need to. They just need to know about it.
Yeah, it's so true, and I think it's been very. I mean, you've been supportive, and like you said, when you reach out to other people. When I first started to reach out, in fact, the Remote Work Life podcast itself started because I was having that lack of learning, or that lack of interaction. So I started to reach out to people, and they started to give me information, and then I started to share that information, and before you know it, the podcast is born, and I'm talking to you, and I think the more conversations that you have is the more obviously the wider your network grows, and you feel better actually. Actually, when I spoke to you that time, when did we speak? Was it last week? I spoke to you, I felt better after the conversation, because I think, like you said, sometimes you tend to beat yourself up about certain things, or you think you're not doing something right, or you think you're the only person doing that thing. But when you start to speak to other people, it's a bit of a pressure release almost. So I was really appreciative for that, for that
My
conversation.
pleasure.
It was
My
really good.
pleasure. But it's interesting. I mean, a lot of teachers, because at heart I'm a teacher, and I still lecture with the university, as you mentioned at the start, and my other work that I might do. But fundamentally, I'm a teacher, and people listening who relate to that, whether you're teaching your kids or you have a hobby that you teach something. There's a lot of teachers, I'm sure, listening, because we teach things and we're not maybe aware of it. But one of the beauties of being teaching is that you learn about something in another way yourself.
Mm-hmm.
When you share with someone, and for example with the self-care template, we were talking through your possible improvements in your self-care as a remote worker, Alex, like I'm learning as well. I'm reminding myself, and it's one of the reasons I love doing the work on self-leadership, because for remote workers and for organizations, because it reminds me. It makes me, when I look at my calendar, go, yeah, I need to put another break in there, or I'm going to go for an extra walk. And it's almost like preaching back to myself. So it's kind of selfish in a way, but I think in general, when we're knowledge workers on computers, and that's the main profile of everyone listening, I'm sure, to counteract the screen time, to counteract the potential oversaturation on digital devices and screens, we need that quality human connection. We need to share, and we need to explain honestly to people that about what we find helps us.
Mm-hmm. And that we're kind of leading into the whole idea of wellness, and I'm still myself understanding what's best for me physically, mentally. When it comes to wellness, Rowena, what is how do you define wellness, and what kind of things does it encompass then? Because you mentioned part of it. What does it encompass for a remote worker?
And so personally for me, so my understanding of wellness is being at peace with my whole self, with the holistic me. So it's not just, I get a little bit esoteric, it's not just the physical body, the mental, the brain, the intelligence, it's also the spiritual, the soul. It's the whole lot for me. That's, quite honest with you, that's the way I see my life. So, and I think people are struggling with that, even just if you think your intuition, and when you're just not sure if something feels a little bit, I'm not too good and I don't know why, which many of us often feel. And that's what I kind of mean by that intuition or soul, or that part of you. And for me, it's been a piece, or in the main, being okay in all those parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I check in with myself, I'm sort of like, and it's not going to be perfect, but it's asking myself in a little bit of self-talk, how am I Most days I try and do it intentionally. How am I physically? Oh, I've got a bit of a stiff back, so I'm going to stand at my standing desk today. How am I mentally? I think I'm okay, but actually I've got a busy day, so I must make sure that I go out for lunch, or I make sure I have a proper conversation with my husband without my daughter around, and parents listening will know what I mean by that.
Yes.
With no interruption.
I know what you mean by that, yes.
And then just my gut or my spiritual side, how is that? Does that feel okay? And that part for me is to do with my values and to do with me living, you know, honestly, truthfully, authentically, all that stuff. And that's an important part, and living to why I chose remote work and why I chose to set up, you know, a company where I could work from anywhere, work that I could work from anywhere. So for me, that's my big picture on wellness. But Alex, yours could be really different. I've spoken to people where it's all about their physical, right?
Yeah.
I've spoken to people where academics, where it's all about their sort of intelligence, mental, okay? So it's personal. It's very personal. We can have a general idea of it. What I'm more interested in is asking people to look at that for themselves.
Got you. And is that, I mean, the wellness, you mentioned also as well when we were talking previously, the holistic individual worker. And that is that part of that then? Could you describe what you mean by the holistic individual?
Holistic is a word that you might hear used in medicine. And what it means is that if you go to the GP and you have a sore throat, they'll ask you about the sore throat, for example, right? If you go to a holistic practitioner, and normally they're in the alternative space, they'll ask how you are generally. They'll talk about your mood. They'll ask questions about nutrition. They look at the big picture, the holistic person, because they think that one symptom is only one part of the solution. Right? And that's where my term holistic worker comes from. And that's what we bring actually completely as remote workers, normally in the normal model where you're working separately from that physical connection to a company or to colleagues. Yes, you might be in a co-working, yes, you might be sharing a space, but you're maybe on your own from that perspective. So how are you holistically? Because especially if you're only working from home, we need to care about work-life balance, we need to care about fatigue, we need to care about screen time, because otherwise because your home and your life are together, the whole holistic person is going to be affected as that worker in the home. So that's what I understand by, and that's why I ask. I often hope that people will see the bigger picture. Now, the other thing to add to that is what I've noticed since we've all gone fully emergency remote is we're all being much more open in these virtual worlds. We're sharing what we think. We're sharing our home lives.
Exactly.
In general, you're getting a view into someone's kitchen, sitting room, bedroom, chaos, whatever it may be. So that is the full person, really, isn't it? It might not be everything. I'm not saying that we don't have to have a privacy or a private part, but I think through this, what's happening to us as a world, as a global population of workers, that's what's happened. The holistic person is being brought to work. And a lot of company missions would say, bring your whole self to work. And it's idealistic to a point, but I still think that it's nice because it's human-centered. It's the full worker and the full person that comes to work. And for me, that's why I use it in some of my teaching and in a lot of my work, because I believe we have to care about the whole person.
Yeah, I think we do. And you're right. I mean, lots of the experts, CEOs from remote business I've spoken to, they've all mentioned similar sorts of words to you. You know, being human-centered, bringing your whole self to work, being truthful as well. Not truthful to the point that you're bearing all, but you have to be truthful in the sense that, or at least build that trust between each other. And how can you do that? That's by obviously the way you work, but also letting them have an understanding, for example, of your home life, so that they can be more, adapt to how you are. So yeah, I think the situation that we're in will probably begin to separate the leaders who are, human-centered from those who are not, because you have to have that empathy, don't you, as well, to
exactly
understand different people's scenarios and adapt.
Exactly, and you know, and it's exactly what I try to do, even through my conversation with sharing that personal how remote work as a ethos way of life is so personal to me, because it is, because of my life experience with my daughter, and I had no choice during those 2 years but to bring the real me to the situation, because that was what I was faced with.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, there's a lot more authenticity, people being real coming through. But I really like that point, and I really want to highlight what you said, because I've heard it too from C-suite. I've heard it coming through from leaders, that human centered, that more. And I hope that's the case, Alex, because leaders who can share a bit more vulnerably and openly, it can make all the difference. It really, really can, in terms of team dynamics.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. And talking about dynamics of a team, I think was it you who told me in that conversation as well, when it comes to supporting each other as well, it's so much more. If you're working in a remote team, or if you have a distributed team or work within a distributed team, you have to have that support of each other anyway. You have to understand each other, work together, and what I've seen, it normally happens quite naturally within remote teams, that support network and building that support network up. But if you don't, for me, when I first started out, I probably didn't have that network that I should have had. That built up over time, and I was again quite deliberate about building it up. So that, honestly, for me, and what prompted that post on LinkedIn, I posted a post on LinkedIn about burnout just the other day, and quite a few people have actually seen that post now. But I became burnt out and the signs for me was, I was feeling tired. I was, my rate of work wasn't what it was. I wasn't productive, as you might say. I was probably isolating myself deliberately as well. Those were some of the giveaway signs for me. Rowena, I mean, I know there aren't typical giveaway signs, but are there any sort of signs that you see generally that are signs of burnout, or that you're not going as well as you should be going?
So it's interesting, because we need to notice those signs from a baseline or a foundation. Mm-hmm. So say Alex is normally quite chatty, or there's this and this that we know about working with Alex in a mm-hmm. team. Then obviously if there's any change in that would be a sign. Mm-hmm. And a good colleague or a good manager would reach out and say, oh, you haven't had your video on calls, or whatever, and sort of tweak that out, okay? Mm-hmm. And look, but so that would be what I would advise people to look at, those little changes in behavior, okay? But also be brave. Have those honest conversations in your direct network of a team. Why not do what, so you've told me honestly there, Alex. Alex, thanks for sharing that. I'll know to keep an eye out in the future. It's good to know that when you experienced that before, these are the things that happened. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you think I should know, so that I can support you about if you're feeling a little bit stressed or overworking? You share with me, you ask me back. I mean, so some of this does happen naturally, but part of the work I do is working with teams to help them have those conversations and practice through a type of role play. Because you've been around since 2009, you probably would know maybe how to do that, how to share, but other people may not, or it may not be something they're comfortable with. So to summarize those 2 points, look for a change in behavior, and then maybe check in, okay, and ask. And then also, why wait for being reactive? Be proactive. Kick off a conversation with the people that are in your team. Is there anything, I need to know? Are you, not the, hey, how are you? Hey, I'm okay. No, tell me, are you really? How could you be okay? You're homeschooling. We're in a pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Etc. And just tell me, what's the 3 crap things today, or whatever. And people will answer you, believe me, right? Mm-hmm. And you'll start that open dialogue. But if you have that kind of open conversation, it can lead into a good supportive colleague or a good leader or whatever going, And how can we support each other? What could I do for you? What are the signs, Alex? If there are those signs, how can I help you? And just chat it through. It's not really obvious, but it does have to be intentional. And hopefully people listening, that will resonate with them as a way of approaching that conversation.
And you mentioned another word that I'm hearing quite often and have used myself quite often and that is intent. It's important to have intent where your self-care is concerned. And again, going back to myself and our initial conversation, I was talking to you about how my self-care is lacking at the moment, or was lacking, and I didn't really have or stick to any sort of plan or any sort of activities. And we started to talk about having a self-care plan, and you've sent a self-care plan. In fact, what I'll do is, obviously, I'll leave a link to that plan in the show notes, so have a look in the show notes, because I think it's really started to help me to visualize how my day is going to be in this scenario as it is now, because I had a plan before, but that plan is kind of a bit different now to what it was before, given my children at home, and I'm homeschooling as well. So that having a plan is so important, isn't it, Rowena? And tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I've developed, or just my framework for looking at self-care, and it's from my own experience, is having those chunks of self-care, that 30, 40 minutes that you do, your Pilates class or yoga class if it's online, your run, your gym, whatever you can manage. And I know we have to, be creative maybe with restrictions. And often I would ask people, and they'd have it in mentoring sessions, and they'd have one or two answers. And then I'd say, but what short activities do you do? And they're like, what do you mean? Okay. Or a lot of parents would say to me, I don't have time for 40 minutes. I don't have any time for self-care. And so I would help them to see that we all have a minute. Most of us are living in the first world. Yeah. We do have a minute if we want to make it. And we might need to be creative. We might need to plan it, but it's there. And you just need to tap into it. But I'm really glad you used the words visualization, because that's my interest in psychology and hypnotherapy, is why when I work through this self-care for myself and with you, when we talk through these chunks, these little activities, maybe some new activities to explore, I always try and visualize myself doing it. And I did it with you when we were talking about the drumming, so I hope we can use that example.
Yes.
So I said to you, if you were going to do your little bit of drumming, you probably think, well, if I'm going to do my drumming with my son, I need to have it, all set up and get ready. Blah, blah. And I said, well, what about coming up with like a biscuit tin or something, or box that you could drum on? And you went, wow, that's it. And I said, exactly, that's a 5-10 minute fun way of bringing in one little snapshot of drumming into the day. It
was a great idea. Is a great idea, because I think, as I said to you when we spoke about it, when I first started playing the drums myself, that was how it all started. It started with me banging on my lap, banging my knife and fork on the dining room table, and annoying the hell out of my mom. That was such a great idea,
So if we were doing more sessions, I would actually tap into that. That was a really positive memory for you. A real, brings up your senses, remembering, tapping.
It really does. It really does.
You could share that with your son, but then you can picture yourself doing the old box from a Christmas present or the biscuit tin, and just maybe challenging him into, let's have a little go together. And it's about that frequency of the activity, because if we try and do the big chunk only, we might fail. Yeah. So if we've the 5-10 minute suggestion or activity that's shorter that we can pull on when we have a really busy day, you can say to yourself, I have 10 minutes between meetings, I'm going to go out and do that. Tap, 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 etc. And that's where the planning is still really important with self-care. I have to say, the most success I've seen with clients bringing in a good, healthy self-care is where they have built it into calendars and they have looked at that profile and extended it out. But it's I want to encourage people, because every little bit helps. And sometimes you're already maybe listening to a piece of music on a break, or perhaps you're picking up a magazine and reading a couple of articles. So what also helps us, Alex, is to say that intention at the start of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I am taking a break from work now, and I'm going to read those 3 stories in my favorite magazine.
Yeah, there's so much there that I could talk about, and I think having somebody like Rowena to speak with, I'm so lucky that I found Rowena, and I'm lucky as well to have other people within my network. But that didn't come about by chance. That came about by conversations. But all the things that are in your mind, and again, the conversation that you and I had about the drumming, that was something that was the back of my mind, which through a conversation with you, it pulled it out to the front. So I was thinking to myself, because previously I was thinking to myself, how am I going to teach my son to play the drums, and how can I build that into sort of like my routine? And I was thinking about the complicated things like the practice pad and the drumsticks and the stand and setting it up and all this sort of thing. But Rowena was able to just simplify it for me. It made things so much easier. And so it's important to have the people who can help you with it, like Rowena. But also, I think another important aspect, Rowena, is having somebody to be accountable to for it, so that you can actually maintain it, right?
Thank you. Exactly. And all the psychology we know about making commitments, changing ideas and suggestions into real behavior and habits. Exactly that. And that's why it does help to work with someone. And to link it back to productivity and overall effectiveness and that whole holistic remote worker, I want to highlight something we spoke about as well, Alex. I'm using a bit of coaching here, but you know that taking that 10-minute break and going away and connecting with your hands on the drum and listening to the sound that you're playing out and progressing along that little beat, that will help you be a better remote worker when you come back to the machine.
Yep.
Because, and for anyone who's feeling a bit skeptical, just even think of what we've lost in commute time, social interaction from being in an office. The thing, like, if you could get a little image here
Yes.
of all that commute time, people grabbing you for a coffee, you going down to the shops, you popping out for your lunch. Over here, we're in the home only.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's such gaps there, and that's why we have to be. That's the reasoning for being more intentional. Movement has gone down with homework only. We know that. I mean, productivity has been maintained. But part of being that holistic remote worker is also saying, I need a break. It will make me better, if you need to say that to yourself. Yeah. When I come back, I will be more productive. I will be more alert. And it's been a pleasure to work through with you. But I have to say that the drums, you gave me a really gem of a one, Alex, because drums is so tactile and sound. Yeah. It's a really lovely example, actually.
No, it's good. And it's, like I said, it's simplified things for me. And it's been, like I said, I'm very lucky to have had you come into my world and at the right moment in time as well to kind of show me that. So that's part and parcel of my routine now. But Rowena, I really wanted to thank you. I mean, I've got so many more questions that I'd like to ask you, but I know we're coming towards the end of time now. So I just wanted to thank you for your time, and just really want to know quickly before we wrap up, what's in store for Rowena, and what are you doing at the moment, and what should we all know about?
Oh, I'm developing out some programs based on what we've spoken about. So the e-learning design, or the lecturer in me, is trying to take all these new learnings in wellness, well-being, the holistic remote worker, and bring it into actionable frameworks for an e-learning course or other products. So I'm working on that in the background, and just developing out, learning every day and reacting to the market. It sounds like and that's why I really enjoy the one-on-ones like we did, Alex, and really meeting with people and helping them as much as possible, because it's much more personal than the group session. So I do both things, but I'm finding that the one-on-one is particularly valuable, and I'm learning from that as well. So just more of all that good stuff. And and like, people can check me out, obviously connect with me on LinkedIn. I share regular content, as you know. And I wanted to finish off by saying thank you to you, actually.
Oh. Okay.
right? Because special thank you, because you gave me a really good piece of feedback when we spoke, when we did the self-care.
Mm-hmm.
You said, I'm going to speak about that with my son or go through, and I'm actually going to work out the template to have a family element to it for those home working as well. So maybe we can pop that into the show notes if
Let's
it's
do
ready.
that. Yeah.
And I think it would be really useful for people either sharing in a home working situation or for families. So we'll do that as well. So thank you for that input
Pleasure.
and feedback and giving me that inspiration. It's been a pleasure, Alex.
No, it's been a pleasure, and I think at some point we're going to have you back on the podcast. But it's been great, Rowena. We'll be listening out and looking out for what you're doing in the future. But until then, thanks again, and thanks to everybody for listening.